50 years ago, my dad passed on his woodworking tradition and hobby to me. And I've been doing woodworking for 50 years now. Since then, my children have grown, and I've taught my son some of my woodworking. And now I'm at a point where I'm getting to teach my grandchildren about woodworking. Just last weekend, they were all here visiting. And even though they're really too young to do much of anything, I mean, come on, what can you expect from a 3-year-old, you know? I had them out here in the workshop, and they were hammering and drilling and screwing and painting and gluing and having a great time. Now, granted, at that age, you can only do so much with them, and you need to give them very careful supervision. But nevertheless, they enjoyed it. Now I can just see coming up that every time they come to visit Papa, they're going to want to make a project with him. And that's good, because then I'll be able to pass on my knowledge and my skills to them. One of the great things about doing this is, of course, seeing what we've got go on to the next generation. And this workbench here is really part of that. Now, this is my workbench, and you've seen this in other videos. This is a workbench for my grandkids. Now, it's 24 inches high, but it's adjustable, and it'll go up to 36 inches high. It's not real big, but then again, kids do little projects. They don't need a big workbench, okay? It's got a full-blown woodworker's vise on the front, and they can do their projects on this bench, and that's what it's been built for. Now, I'm going to show you how to build this bench. Now, it basically breaks down into some basic areas of construction. First, of course, the bench top itself, and then the legs, and of course we got to put those two together, and then finally putting the vise on. So you can kind of say we're going to do this in 4 stages, all right? And of course the bench top itself is probably the most important part, but it's also, in a sense, the easiest part. This is just edge glued top. Now the thing is, this is all made from construction lumber. I mean, you know, you look at a lot of workbenches today and they're made out of maple, and I'd love to make a maple workbench for myself, let alone for my grandkids. But we're talking a lot of money there. So this is all made out of just regular construction lumber that I got from my local lumber yard. To do that, what I ended up doing was some very careful cutting, because a lot of the lumber we buy at the lumber yard isn't really good enough. You know, it's got knot holes in it, and it's got splits in it, and it's warp, twists, cupping, whatever, okay? So to make this top, what I did is I started off with some 2x material, and I took my best sections and I cut it into strips that are 1.5 inches, or actually they start out more like 1.75 inches by 3/4 of an inch. So it's essentially 1x2s. Now the reason I didn't use 1x2s is because if you buy 1x2s, the corners are rounded, and so I wouldn't have a flat top. So I made my own 1x2s, and then I took those 1x2s and I edge glued them all together, making a tabletop. So I now have a tabletop here that's 12 by 30, okay, 1.5 inches thick. If it was my workbench, I'd go thicker than 1.5 inches, but we're talking kids here, okay? This is rugged enough, I don't think they can destroy it even if they try. Maybe if they got their hands on my chainsaw they could, or one of my other power saws, but I don't let them touch those tools. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put this top together, and then I'm going to build the legs. Now, the legs were actually the trickiest part of this whole thing, because one of the things I wanted to do was make it height adjustable. As it sits here on the workbench, it's 24 inches high. But as time goes on, the kids will grow. And if you look at my workbench, this is 36 inches high. This is about to my waist. This is adult height. So I'm going to start them off at 24 inches high, but it needs to go up, and it will ultimately reach a height of 36 inches. And so the legs are, as you can see here, there's an overlap, and that's because they're 2 pieces of wood and they're bolted together, but there's a series of bolt holes so I can unbolt it and rebolt it and move it up as they need it. That was the trickiest part of figuring out this project, is how in the world was I going to get the legs to do that while keeping it sturdy. You know, I've seen some things with adjustable legs that were really iffy. And this is a workbench. I can't afford to have it iffy. So come on with me as we go ahead and start cutting up our material, gluing this top together, and making this workbench. Okay, my bench top has had overnight to dry, so we can pull the clamps now. I want to point out something here. I went ahead and waxed my rails on my clamps, and I did that so that the glue would not stick to them. There's almost always squeeze out from gluing up a panel like this, and actually there should be. If you don't have any squeeze out, good chance you haven't used enough glue. So there's a couple ways we can go about this, but I'm going to be planing this to get my surface even. And so I'm going to clean this off with a chisel, at least to the point of getting it down level. If it's sticking up, it's going to run through the planer unevenly, and we definitely don't want that. I'm not worried about getting it all off because the planer will do that, but any lumps sticking up have got to come off. And the other side is going to be worse because as that glue squeezes out, you always get more to the bottom side. Probably has something to do with this little thing called gravity. As you can see, it doesn't take much to clean this up. For the trestle style legs, the upper and lower part of the trestle, in other words the foot and the part that attaches to the bottom of the workbench top, can easily be cut out of a single piece of 2x6. We got a 3-inch wide piece and a 2-inch wide piece. Together that adds up to 5. This is 5.5 inches wide, so I got a little bit of excess. Nice thing about this is that I can cut here between the knot holes and get all 4 pieces out of that. And so I'll have pieces that don't have any knot holes. I don't have any weakness brought by the knot holes. And I'm really not creating a whole lot of scrap. I mean, these little pieces don't really matter much. With the top and bottom pieces made, the real challenge is doing the uprights. And what makes this challenging is that I want to be able to have it adjustable. Since this is a child's workbench and children grow, we want to be able to change the height from, say, 24 to 36 inches. Now, the easy way to do that, of course, is just having 2 sets of legs. Well, the problem with that is, 1, we waste material, and 2, what about all those stages in between? So what I really want is an adjustable leg. And what I've decided to do is to use 2 pieces of wood for each leg and put a series of holes so they can be bolted together and they can be set to, say, 4, maybe even 5 different heights. My problem came in, now that's challenging enough as it is, but my real problem came in when I went to the lumberyard to get the material. The only thing I had available to me in my local lumberyard was number 2 common pine. That's what happens when we go to lumberyards. You know, if we're not working with hardwoods, we're stuck with what we can get our hands on. Unfortunately, the number 2, as you can see, has got knot holes in it, and there's a couple splits here, and it's not the best wood. So, okay, we can still make use of it because there's good sections in between the knot holes, or even including some of the tight knot holes that we can make use of, and that's what I've cut these pieces out of here. I found places where it was good. You can just barely see. I've got just the edge of a knot hole right here on this piece. This piece actually has a knot hole in it, but it's a nice tight knot hole, so I can live with it being there. It's not going to weaken the part anyway. And so that's where we're going to do it. Now, if I was trying to make a nice piece of furniture, what I would do is I would mortise and tenon this to put this together, or even use dowels to put it together. But we're just making a workbench, and so there's a much easier way to do it. And that's literally to just bolt it together, okay? I had thought about doing maybe a half lap or a modified half lap where I was just doing the cutout into the foot and the top, but since this is a 1x8, that's 7.5 inches of material takeout. That's a lot of material takeout, so it's a whole lot easier to just glue and bolt them together, or actually glue and screw them together, let the glue dry, and then I'll have my pieces. I've gone ahead and pre-drilled the holes in my parts just so that it'd be easier to put them together. I always believe in drilling a clearance hole first and often a pilot hole. And that also gave me the opportunity, since I used a combination drill countersink, to go ahead and put countersinks so that my screws will sit below flush. So now we're ready to put some glue and start gluing these together. I've also marked my boards. Now ideally we want this glue covering the entire surface here. So I'm smear it around with my finger. I could use a brush for this. I probably should with this much surface area, considering how many of these I'm doing. line the board up, and I'm going to use a square to make sure that it really is square. Okay. All right, what happened when I drilled that first one in is it shifted over a little bit. That can happen. The glue makes a great lubricant to make these pieces shift. I had not drilled any pilot holes, so I'll go ahead and put in a little bit of a pilot hole. What that's going to do for me is make sure it doesn't shift again, because it'll start into that hole. Okay, again, I'm making sure it's square, and I can tell by feeling this bottom edge that it did not shift this time. So that's what I wanted. Okay, one down, 3 more to go. One thing you really want to watch out for is cupping on these boards. Pine is notorious for that, cupping and twisting. And I can tell this one is cupped, not so much because I felt it down here on the workbench, but when I set it up here and I try and line it up, and then I go to drill my pilot hole, I found it moving. Okay, why is that? Well, because I only had pressure on this side, not on this side. Now, if I flip it over, same board, okay, now I put pressure on this side, and I've got pressure on this side as well. So I ended up going back and countersinking this side so that I would have a good good pressure as I'm putting it together. Whenever you've got a cup, and I'll have to say this is a very minimal cup on this particular board, you want to try and get that cup face so that the concave side is facing the other board. That's going to give you your best contact. It's also going to help to straighten out that cupping. If you go the other way, you're just going to increase the cupping. So I've got my pilot holes drilled. I've got my cup side down. Go ahead and make sure I've got it square, and we can put our screws in. I made a mistake in that I forgot to drill the holes, the mounting holes, into the upper part of the leg, the part that's got attached to the bottom side of the bench top, before I went ahead and put this together. Now I could take it apart, but then I'd have a hard time getting the glue to stick going back together again. So I'm going to go ahead and drill them here on the bench, in the bench vise, a block onto here to keep from messing up my bench. So I'm using a little jig here. It's called a drill block. It's just a block with a bunch of different size holes in it, the bushings for different size holes. If you don't have one of these, you can just take a piece of wood and drill your own. The idea is I want to make sure I'm absolutely vertical, okay? So I'm going to just start the hole. There we go. Now I've got some positive location. And what this is going to do is it's going to maintain my drill 90 degrees, okay? And that's what I needed to do. There we go. So now I've got a clean hole that's perpendicular. I know is perpendicular, so that I can go into a threaded insert there. So we've got our pieces for our legs put together, and now the tricky part is actually getting the legs together, especially since we want an adjustable. So what I've done is laid out a series of holes on this piece. This is the top part of the leg, and these are spaced every 2 inches apart. And then in the top of the bottom piece, I've got a place for 4 holes near the top. So that gives me a total of 6 different positions that I can use, raising it every 2 inches from 24 inches to 36 inches. Now all I'd like to do is drill the holes in here. Now the other thing I'm going to do with this is that in this bottom part here, I'm going to go ahead and install threaded inserts. And the reason I'm putting the threaded inserts in there is so that I can bolt it together and take it apart. I'm using 1/4 inch threaded inserts mostly because that's what I've got. But really, 4 1/4 inch bolts in each of these legs would be plenty to hold it together. So as before, I'm using my drill block to make sure I get my slot holes vertical. And I'm going to drill first a 1/4 inch hole into this side. This is the bottom part where the threaded inserts are going to go into. And then I'm going to drill the hole out further to, I believe this is, 23/64, which is the correct size for these threaded inserts. And you really need to be careful about that size when you're putting threaded inserts in, because if it's too small, it's not going to grip good. If it's too big, you're not going to get it all the way in. So, start putting my holes in. There's the holes in the bottom piece. Now I'm going to go ahead and drill them out. And since I already have a pilot hole in there, a 1/4-inch pilot hole, I don't need to use anything to hold my drill bit vertically, because it's just going to follow that hole. I do want to be careful that I don't overdo it. And it's ready now for the threaded inserts, which I need a hex key for. Oh, wrong size. Let's try metric sizes. There we go. So if you've never put threaded inserts in, they're really easy to work with. They just literally screw in, and you want to get them flush or just below flush. And they're pretty much self-centering and self-leveling, so that's nice. Okay, so that's in. The lower part is now ready. I can go ahead and drill the upper part. Now let me tell you a little trick here, okay? I'm going to be using 1/4-inch bolts, and I've got a 1/4-inch drill bit here. Okay, theoretically, that means that my bolt should slip right through those holes. In reality, they tend to stick a little bit. So here's the way you handle that. You go ahead and drill your 1/4-inch hole, and then you go to the next size up drill bit, and you drill it a 1/64 of an inch over. Now, it's not very much. It's only 30,000ths of an inch. But what it is, it's enough to make it so that bolt will slip through there easily, and you won't have a hassle assembling your workbench. There's one other place we want to install threaded inserts, and that's the bottom side of the bench top. I've gone ahead and drilled holes, and I told you I made an error and forgotten to drill these holes, in the tops of my legs, okay? And that's so that I can put bolts through those into the bottom side of the bench top. And I did that mostly so that it can be taken apart and moved around fairly easily. So again, we're going to go ahead and drill our 1/4-inch pilot hole and then drill it out. The difference here is we do not want to drill all the way through the bench top. We want to go no more than about 3/4 of an inch deep, maybe an inch. I mean, these are shade over a 1/2 inch long, say 9/16, okay? So we want to keep that in mind for how deep we drill these holes. Helps to use the right drill bit. You can't fit the next size larger drill bit in the hole. Keep in mind our bench top is 1.5 inches thick. So even if I go 1 inch deep with this hole, it's not going to be a problem. If I go any more than that, it might be. Appears I'm going into a knot hole here. Always helps when you're using a threaded insert to actually make your hole a little too deep, because you never know when you might have to use a bolt that's a little too long. So I really only need the half inch of depth here that my threaded insert requires, but I'm going a little deeper than that to give clearance in case I end up using a bolt that's a little bit too long. So now with those holes in place, I can put these threaded inserts in, and then this will be ready to attach the legs. So I've gone ahead and bolted my legs together, and I've done it at the compressed setting, not the fully expanded one. You can do it either way. I just thought it'd be easier to work with it this way. So now I'm ready to attach these to the tabletop. Now, one thing I want to mention here that I've done, and I've done it intentionally, and that is that I've got my legs mounted as close to the edge of the tabletop as reasonably possible. I'm within about a 1/2 inch. And I've done it so that the foot is even farther outside. So actually the foot is just a touch back past the edge of the tabletop. And there's a reason for that, and that is I'm trying to get the most stability as I can. This isn't a very big table. And we're going to have, theoretically anyway, at least it's the idea, we're going to have kids pounding on it and cutting things with it on it. And so I want that stability. It's hard to get stability out of a really small table. So But even that couple extra inches is enough to make a difference, and so I want to take advantage of that. Okay, so what I've got, besides trying to put it on upside down, what I've got is I've got my upper part of my leg mounted so that this foot can be as far out as possible. At the same time, I've got it mounted in a way so that my lower part of the upright here, okay, is toward the inside of the leg, not towards the outside. And the reason for that is I've got to give it some sort of cross bracing, okay? So if I'm going to attach the cross bracing to this part, not to the upper part. And that keeps it pretty much the same no matter what height I've got the tabletop at. So once I get this mounted, I'll go ahead and measure that and cut that cross bracing. So that's pretty solid as it is, which is great. Okay, why aren't you tightening up? Okay, I mentioned a moment ago that I needed to put a cross base here, even though my legs are pretty sturdy. That's because it's the framework here is square, and squares are not structurally strong. You need a diagonal. Triangles are structurally strong. And so one of the ways we accomplish that is we put a piece like this where we've got two parallel legs, and this really doesn't form a triangle, but if you make a diagonal through it, well, yeah, we have a triangle, okay? If it was a thin strip, it wouldn't give us that strength, but because it's got the width to give us that, we get that triangle type of effect. So I'm going to go ahead and attach this to the lower part, which is the inner part of my legs. And I want to be careful I don't get any glue on the outer part or the upper part of the legs while I'm at it, or I just ruin my whole ability to adjust. So I'm really not going to put a lot of glue on here. And I'm making a point of putting that glue on the side of my, I guess the side of this piece that's farthest away from this piece, okay? Did that make any sense? So with the glue on there, I can set this in place, and we're going to use a combination of glue and screws here. Maybe a little bit of overkill, but again, as I mentioned before, we're going to have pounding and cutting and stuff going on. That's going to be a little rough on the bench, and we want to make sure it's plenty strong enough. So I'm clamping my brace here in place just long enough to screw it so it doesn't slide around on me. A lot of people wouldn't bother clamping this, but I found that I save myself a lot of trouble by clamping things while I'm drilling them and screwing them. Okay, so now all I need to do is drill some holes and put some screws in. I'm using a number 6 tapered drill bit countersink combination. So it gives me a clearance hole, the pilot hole, and the countersink all in one shot. Makes it really easy to put this together. This is one of those tools, it's like, I don't know why it took me so long to buy them. But probably because they aren't exactly cheap, but once I bought them, I was like, these are great. I remember many a time, put the drill in, drill the hole. Take the drill bit out, put another drill bit in, drill that hole. Take that drill bit out, put in the countersink and drill that. Now I'm ready to assemble it all. So now I take that out, and I didn't have an impact driver, I just had my drill, so now I put the Phillips bit into the drill. So I got 4 different things in the same drill just to join something together. I either got smarter or lazier as I've gotten older. I'll let you decide which. Okay, now there's no more need for these clamps. Now we can stand our workbench up. Now, if you want, you can add a shelf attaching it to this and putting it in here. It isn't a requirement in the design, but storage is always great, right? So a shelf would be good in there. And now the only other thing we've got to do is attach our vise. The bench is basically built, although it's sitting here upside down, but that doesn't mean we're done with the project. There's still a couple things to do, most notably install the vise. Now, I've chosen to go with a fairly heavy-duty vise for this rather than one of the smaller metal vices. And the main reason for it is because I've had bad luck with those smaller vices. And so this vise, it may seem like it's overkill for this workbench, but I think it's going to do a great job. In order to install it, we've got to, of course, take the vise apart. I just set the guide rods aside there. We have two pieces here that really we need to concern ourselves with. One is the mounting plate, which goes on the underside of the workbench, and that's going to go right about here. And remember, this is reverse, so when I flip this over, this will be on the left side, okay? And I'm basically putting this in about 4 inches from the edge, because I'm trying to leave enough room right here between the vise and the leg for dog holes. And it's not a lot of space, but... And then I need 2 pieces of wood, and this is a piece of 1x4, and this is a cut down piece of 2x4 to 1 inch thick. I couldn't go with 2 1x4s because I need this to be thick enough that I can drill 3/4 of inch holes in it for dog holes, okay? Even there, I'm kind of pressing it, but it's a small bench, right? So the tricky part here is aligning the holes. Now these 3 holes here for the screw and the 2 guide rods are not in line, which really makes this challenging to put in. You really got to measure it carefully, and they really don't give you proper dimensions for doing this. So you want to be extremely careful if you use this kind of vise in doing your measurements. I've gone ahead and transferred those dimensions to my 2 pieces of wood, which I'll need to drill holes in. But before that, I'm going to go ahead and put the base plate on here. And so I've got it aligned right where I want it. It's right up at the edge of the bench, and I'm using a transfer punch to get my hole alignment. Okay, so now I can go ahead and drill my holes, and I'll be installing this using some 5/16 lag screws. And the reason I'm using 5/16 lag screws is that the holes in here are 5/16. Likewise, the holes in this plate, which attach to the outer jaw of the vise, are 5/16. Okay, so I've gone ahead and drilled my 2 jaw halves, and I've drilled for my vise to go into the workbench. So now I'm ready to go ahead and put these lag screws in. Keep in mind that yours may end up being a little different if you're using a different vise than what I'm using. There's a lot of variety out there, and they're not all made the same. One thing I did encounter with this vise is that it's apparently made in China because the dimensions seem a little off. And what it is that they're metric dimensions. And so when I'm trying to get my vise to be to figure out the measurements for these holes, what I'm finding is that I'm ending up with what seems like kind of odd dimensions in inches. So that's why. So many things being made in China these days. Many of the tools we get are made in China, and they are in metric sizes. Okay, so that's on. Now I'll go ahead and install my guide rods to help me with the alignment of the jaw parts. Here's the half of the jaw that's going to sit up against the bench. This is a 1x. And I've gone ahead and drilled holes in this, drilled and countersunk holes that I can use for mounting it. I went ahead and made sure I countersunk them deep enough so that my screw heads would surely end up below flush. I don't need screw heads scratching up my wood, or my child's wood, my grandchild's wood. Okay. Now we can go ahead and put the other half of the jaws on. Again, slipping it over the guide rods. Okay. One nice thing about working on this little bench is that, because I've got it upside down, I know that the height I'm putting these in is flush with the top of my bench top. Okay, so now with my screw of all the way in, so I now have my outer jaw, my inner jaw, and the screw mechanism, the jack mechanism, all together. And put these last 2 screws in that hold the face plate onto the outer jaw. Okay, so now other than a handle, this is all put together. I guess I need to come up with a handle. So here's the bench with the vise installed, pretty much ready to go. I'm using a 1-inch dowel rod for my handle, and I've made a couple of caps for the end so it won't fall out. This is just 1.25 inch dowel rod with a 1-inch hole drilled in it. Fairly simple. I did the same thing on the handle for the vices on my bench here, and it's worked well. So after that, really the only thing that's left is to put some bench dog holes in the top here. And I'm not going to show that on camera simply because camera angles don't work out too well with this sitting up on my bench. But this is what I'm going to use for doing. I got a 3/4 inch Forstner bit, and I'm using this adapter here to hold my drill straight to make sure it's perpendicular. You really need bench dog holes to be perpendicular to the surface. So I'll be putting 3 bench dog holes here and 3 here, and then 2 in my vise. And I may add a few more going down the length because I like to use hold downs, and my grandkids will probably pick up on that watching me and want to use hold downs as well. So this is it. I mean, this is a sturdy bench. I'm sure the kids can't pound on it hard enough or climb on it hard enough to cause it any damage. It's stable, it's rock solid. One thing I want to note for you is that because we put the legs attached to the tabletop with bolts, okay, into threaded inserts, if it turns out you've got a little bit of wobble in it, what you can do is pull one of those bolts out, decide which way you got to add some height in, and just slip a washer in there between the top of the leg piece, this one here, and the tabletop, okay? Hopefully you won't have to do that, but that would be a way to even it up very easily. So I've got my bench for my grandkids. Now it's your turn. Go ahead and make some sawdust and make yourself a workbench for your kids or your grandkids and help them get involved in your woodworking.